Today, something took place. It has changed everything, and I can't even begin to explain it. The day had begun like any other. Today, I decided to spend time with my parents while my husband worked the second shift at his job. I can't work right now because I got mono a year ago and then developed panic disorder, a condition that causes panic attacks, extreme anxiety, and other symptoms. I was fired from my job because of this. There was something off about me. My husband told me it was because of my worry and took me to see my parents. On days when things are really bad, I usually go to my parents because sometimes my attacks are so strong that they knock me out. I hoped that today would not be one of those days. We were getting ready to go out to dinner around 5 in the afternoon. Because I was feeling anxious, we decided to go to a small business just up the road that has a regular flow of customers but isn't too crowded. I put my phone in the pocket of my jacket because my husband wouldn't call me again until 7 or 8. He had been at work for about an hour. I was just about done tying my shoes when I heard my mom cry, which made me jump up right away. She was very scared as she looked out the window with her hands over her mouth. My dad and little brother also ran into the room, and they were just as confused as I was until they saw. It's not that far from where we live to an important airport. Planes often fly low overhead as they prepare to land or take off. However, the plane lost control and crashed. All we could do was watch as a fire broke out behind the knob on top of the hill, about a mile behind our house. My family and I looked for our phones, but we never seemed to be able to find them. My mom knew I had mine on me, so she took it out of the pocket of my hoodie and called 911. Everyone in the room just stood there and stared out the window. The flames were dancing just above the hill. The passengers and workers on board were going to die, and we felt helpless. My mom said into the phone, "Please, you have to send help. A plane has crashed." She took a moment to think. "Where is my address?" "Yes, of course. It's..." As soon as she stopped, my dad went to his gun closet, unlocked it, and took out his judge pistol, making sure it was loaded. My younger brother and I moved away from the window one step. My breathing got faster and shallower. It was wrong. It's not possible. Things shouldn't have been going that way. "Carrie," my dad said as he grabbed my shoulders. I looked away from the window and into his eyes. He looked just as scared as I did. "Listen, little girl. I understand. Don't forget to breathe properly." He let go of my shoulders, turned around, and gave me a 12 gauge. I nodded shakily. When I ask for something, I know it's a lot, but this isn't normal. We need to be ready for everything, okay? I gave another nod. My dad smiled and tapped me on the shoulder and didn't say anything. "Besides, we already know you're a good shot. Second in the districts, am I right?" I gave another nod for the third time. "Go to the gun closet, get a box of shells, and load the gun." My family is a shooter, except for my mom, who is terrified of guns. Or, I was. My older brother got married and lives alone now, but the three of us and my dad can shoot pretty well. The 1180 over and under was grabbed by my younger brother, who also loaded it. As always, my mom said no to a gun. She has been shot in front of the judge before, but only once. Not ever again. Muttering, "I'm sorry," Mom shook her head and held the phone closer to her ear. "I'm still here," she said. "They just shouldn't be." As they came down the hill, we watched them. Some were crawling, others were dragging themselves along by grabbing pieces of grass and pulling themselves along, and still others were walking funny because their bodies were hurt too much to move properly. But this wasn't the scariest thing of all. It was because they moved quickly. I got dizzy, which was the first sign that I was about to have an attack. I turned my head away. No. I had to keep my mind on it. "You don't get it." I could hear my mom crying on the phone. That crash should not have killed anyone. She was shaking by this point, but she was still calm like the rest of us. We had to do it. "You don't see what we see. They are coming. They are coming. Send help right away." She threw up her free hand in anger and then locked the back door. It doesn't matter who you send. Just send the police and the army so. Please excuse me. No one screamed or made a sound like they were scared. We knew what was going on when my mom almost dropped the phone. The front door was forgotten. When we slowly turned around, we saw a woman, or what was left of her, standing in the hall that led from the den to the kitchen. Her clothes were torn and her body was bloody and gutted. I think she was a waitress. She was missing a high-heeled shoe, and one of her arms was just about out of reach. She might have had dirty blonde hair. There was so much blood that I couldn't tell. Dad pointed the judge at her, but my mom and I held out our hands to tell him no. The woman moved forward with jerky steps. Her knees were bent at weird angles, which made it hard for her to move. Where was our fear? What made us so calm? My dad looked back out the back door and saw that the others had stopped moving. As she shuffled into the room, blood was pooling below her and trailing behind her. My younger brother also looked. He asked in a whisper, "Dad, are they?" "I'm not sure." A woman stopped in front of my mother and me. I quickly looked behind her and saw that the front door was locked. Why did she close it? Why did it matter to her? "Ma'am? Are you there, ma'am?" The 911 operator asked, and I could hear them. The phone was now just below my mom's neck after she put it down. "I'm sorry to be a bother," the waitress said in a throaty voice. It was clear that she had a deep cut on her neck as she talked. "It's only. I'm thirsty very much." "Thirsty?" I asked as I lowered my shotgun so that the barrel was now facing the ground. The safety was on. Why didn't I feel scared? "You need some water?" "Oh, yes, please," she begged hard. It was really hot. "All I need is a little bit." "Mom," my brother said in a low voice, tilting his head a little so we could hear. "Don't." I saw that my mom had put the phone on speaker when she put it on the coffee table. The person who answered 911 kept quiet and listened to the whole thing. She reassured him, "It's okay, Spencer," and moved toward the flight attendant. "Say, Carrie, come with me." "Yes, sir." "Okay," I said. For safety's sake, I held the shotgun in the bend of my arm with the barrel still pointing down. Without a gun, I wasn't going to leave my mother alone right now. I stayed on my side in the kitchen and put myself between the hostess and the front door. My mom opened a cabinet door, reached up, and took out a glass. No words were spoken. "What do you think?" Then she turned on the tap and made a strange sound that I thought meant she was desperate. I asked, "What is it?" She didn't say anything. "Mom? What is wrong?" "That's dirty." "What is the glass?" "Get a new one." "But I don't think she'll mind at all. She's..." "Carrie, no." She moved out of the way so I could see the water. It was more than just dirt. It was kind of brown red. The plane must have hit the water, putting blood and mud into the water. When she took her eyes off the water, she stopped moving. I saw her out of the corner of my eye. What a nice lady. She smiled and put her face close to mine. "Is it filthy?" "Okay, that's fine. I need to drink something badly, so I..." "No," I said, shaking my head. "No, you need clean water. I believe there is bottled water outside in my dad's shooting building that I can get for you." She said, "Oh, I wouldn't go out there just yet. A lot of people are getting lost and don't get it." My mother asked, "But you do?" The lady in charge only said She didn't want to sit down when I pulled out a chair from the dinner table for her. "I doubt you'd want me to make things worse for you." She looked at the path of blood she was making through the house. Mom said, "It's really okay. Moving around with those wounds must hurt." The flight attendant smiled again. "Thank you very much. I had always heard that the South was a friendly place." When she sat down in the chair, her knees hurt and her arm was lying on her lap. I begged, "Please just let me go get the water for you. I didn't get it at all." Something as small as a thought can set off an attack in me because I have panic disorder. I was so close at first, but now I'm relaxed. We were all ready, but my dad and brother were still watching out. Your dad might want to go with you. The woman agreed. I think that would be safe. Mom, I said to her. I gave her the shotgun after she looked at me. It was no, she said. Mom, could you please? I believe in her, but I'm not sure what else to say. My mom looked at me quickly and then at the gun. She grabbed it with a shaking hand. That's a small button next to the trigger, I said. Do you understand what this is? She said yes. Make sure it's off before you shoot in case something goes wrong. Say, I know. I turned around and went into the den. Hey Dad? He grunted to let me know he saw me. I have to get to your building. He looked at me quickly and asked, what do you want to do? Are you going outside? What the heck are you doing? I started by saying, listen, the woman just needs some water. They hit a pipeline and... Just oh, Dad said. She told me you'd keep me safe. They're not going to attack? She really didn't know. You didn't know? No. Dad took a worried breath and turned off his safety. Dad told Spencer, please stay inside and be with your mom. Get it? Spencer said yes, and my dad and I walked to the door. As we did so, my dad grabbed the building keys from his desk. For a moment, we stood at the door and looked outside. Still in the field about 100 yards from our house, no one was close. Thought we'd make it in time, since the building was right outside the house. Are you certain you can do this? Dad inquired. Yes, yes. I believe so, I said, turning off the safety. All set. Dad said yes, opened the back door, and we ran into the building. He opened the door, and I stood at the front door, pointing outside, and listened too. There's nothing. As we ran back inside, my dad grabbed the case of water bottles. We hadn't seen anyone in the fields yet. He didn't want to lock the building door again because we just wanted to get back inside. We locked the back door once we were inside, and Spencer let out a sigh of relief. None of them moved, he said. They looked at you but didn't do anything. I put my shotgun back in the crook of my arm and turned on the safety. I then went and got some water bottles for the woman, who I could hear talking to my mom in the kitchen about normal things. Doing laundry, spending time with family. It was so strange. As soon as I got to the kitchen and gave her the water bottles, I realized I had done something wrong. Her arm wasn't useful. She drank the first bottle all at once, with some water leaking out of the cut in her neck. I opened the bottles for her. She reached for the second bottle, deep breathing because she hadn't had much air to breathe while she was drinking. I paid attention as she drank the first bottle. I had a lot of questions. Who are you? I asked as she put the second bottle to her lips. She stopped, and her eyes locked on mine. And the fear began to set in. Her look was raw and far away. I don't get it. Don't do that. You were not able to. She didn't say anything as she drank more slowly this time. She took the half-full bottle from her burned lips and let out a sigh. My mom asked me, "What is your name?" The woman then smiled and held on to the bottle as she set it down on her knee. June, she answered. Can you guess what month I was born within? That's tough, my mom said with a smile to make June laugh. Why August? Funny, June laughed as she brought the drink back up from the bottle. After that, she looked at my left hand. Those are pretty rings. Just got married? I looked down at my wedding and engagement rings. A little more than a year now. I bet it was lovely, June said with a sigh. I had a husband. What a great guy he is. This guy is called Troy Halls. You're going to tell him, right? It was okay with my mom and me. Say promise. June closed her eyes and hummed a strange tune for a short time. You know what? The other people will be thirsty too. There might not be enough water for you. Don't worry, Mom told her. Help is on the way. They really can't help. However, they can give you water. Are they going to listen? If not, we will, I told her. June moved around in her chair and drank her last glass of water. I think I'll stay a while. Until I'm sure everything is fine. My mom said, "That's fine," I said, "Carrie, I'll be right back." When Mom walked into the room, I heard, "I believe they will not harm us. I believe. They probably just want to be heard. Now you can put the guns away." Then they told the 911 operator, "All they want is water. Send a lot of water." No. No one survived. This isn't a joke, though. No, sir. Please listen, ma'am. You need to trust me. Send water only. It's now midnight, and we've heard a huge number of stories and confessions. I am not even tired. I can't believe there hasn't been a panic attack yet. I'm not sure if my husband even knows that he's off work in 2 hours. I didn't get his call on his break, so I couldn't tell him. We're still giving out water. June is still here with me. She walks back and forth with me as we talk to each person. I have no idea what she is. I have no idea what they are. It has been proven that all of them are dead. There is no pulse, breath, or brainwave activity. They are here, though. Unlike the fires that went out a long time ago, something of them still exists. No one knows how long they'll stay. We are no longer scared by how they look. They have even come to help, my older brother and his nurse wife. It's strange how calm it is, like this happens all the time. It doesn't make sense. Past all of science, past what God or nature can do, past all limits. The clock struck 10 p.m. as I settled into my chair, the familiar glow of the computer screens in the 911 call center casting a soft light over my desk. My name is Lana, and for the past 5 years, I've been the voice on the other end of the line, the one people reach out to in their darkest moments. Tonight, the darkness would swallow us whole. It started as a whisper, a murmur of unease that crept through the city's veins. The first call was a crack in the dam, the one that heralds the flood. A man's voice, shrill with panic, pierced the calm of the call center. My wife. I don't know, she's gone mad. She bit me. There was this guy who attacked her on the way home, and now she's. Oh God, she's coming at me again. The line went dead, a silence that screamed louder than the man's terror. I dispatched the police and an ambulance, my hands steady, but my heart beginning to race. It was just the beginning. Call after call lit up the boards, a symphony of chaos that crescendoed with each passing minute. People were being attacked by loved ones, by strangers, by... What? My mind shied away from the word that pressed against my consciousness. Zombies. It was absurd, a thing of movies and nightmares, not the reality of a city that never sleeps. Stay at your posts, our supervisor commanded, his voice a taut string ready to snap. Keep taking calls. We're the lifeline. We can't break now. But lifelines can fray, and as the night wore on, the fabric of our reality tore apart. The city was under siege, not from an enemy that could be reasoned with or negotiated with, but from a plague of walking death, relentless and hungry. I took a call from a young girl, no more than 10, hiding in her closet, whispering her address to me. I could hear the growls and thumps of her parents searching for her, no longer the protectors but the predators. I promised her help was on the way, a promise that tasted like ash in my mouth. The building's security system clicked on, a red light blinking its ominous warning. We were in lockdown. No one in, no one out. A sanctuary or a tomb? The thought was a seed planted in fertile soil, growing roots that twined around my spine. I was Lana, the 911 operator, the calm in the storm. But as the night bled away, the storm raged, and calm was a distant memory. I was the last line, the voice in the darkness, and as the sun rose on a city that had become a charnel house, I wondered if anyone was left to call, to cry for help, to be saved. The line rang again, and I answered. The city's heartbeat had turned erratic. a staccato rhythm of terror and violence that pulsed through the phone lines. Lana, remained the steadfast voice amidst the cacophony, a beacon of hope that was dimming with each passing hour. The isolation of the lockdown was a creeping vine, tightening around my chest with every call I answered. The pleas for help were a litany of despair, and I was the scribe, recording the end of days with a trembling hand. A mother sobbed into the receiver, her children whimpering in the background as she begged for assistance. I dispatched the police, knowing the response time was a gamble with death as the dealer. The line crackled with the sound of her door splintering, and then the call was swallowed by a guttural roar that haunted the silence that followed. I was trapped in this concrete tomb, the call center a mausoleum for the living, a sarcophagus of screens and blinking lights. The city's cries were a chorus without end, and I was the conductor, powerless to stop the symphony of horror. The lockdown was a double-edged sword, keeping the nightmare at bay while slicing into our hope of escape. The building's security cameras, once a source of safety, now flickered with the shadows of those who had turned. The undead, a term that my mind still struggled to accept, roamed the lower levels, their groans a dirge that echoed up through the floors. I took a call from a man barricaded in his store, the undead clawing at his makeshift fortress. I guided him to silence, to turn off the lights, to not make a sound, even as the terror in his breath told me they were breaking through. His last words were a whisper of thanks, a final act of defiance against the darkness. The weight of my helplessness was a tangible thing, a shroud that settled over my shoulders and pressed down with each desperate call. I was the last line, the final thread connecting the living to a sliver of hope, but as the night wore on, that thread frayed, worn thin by the relentless tide of the epidemic. The city outside was a maelstrom of chaos, and within the walls of the call center, I was adrift in a sea of despair, clinging to my duty like a lifeline. But lifelines can snap, and as dawn approached, with the city in the throes of madness, I wondered if the sun would rise on a world irrevocably changed, or if it would simply illuminate the ruins of what once was. The night had been a relentless wave of panic and horror, but nothing prepared me for the call that came just as the first light of dawn began to seep into the darkened sky. It was from Mark, the husband of my colleague, Janine. His voice was a tightrope of fear and hope. "Lana, it's Janine. She didn't come home. Have you heard from her?" I hadn't. Janine's shift had ended right before mine started. She should have been home hours ago. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized the epidemic wasn't just on the streets, it was personal. The virus was a shadow that had crept into our lives, silent and deadly. I switched to the security feeds, the screens flickering with the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. The lower levels were a tableau of the macabre, bodies strewn across the floor, some motionless, others not so much. The undead, their movements jerky and purposeless, roamed with a hunger that was once human. I had to stay focused, be the voice of reason in the midst of madness. But as I watched the feeds, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. There, among the wandering dead, was Janine. Her lab coat was torn, her gait unsteady and unnatural. I stifled a sob. This was no longer a distant calamity, it was here, tearing my world apart. The calls kept coming, a relentless tide of fear and desperation. I was their lifeline, but who was mine? I was alone in this fight, a solitary sentinel in a sea of chaos. But I couldn't let despair take hold, I had to be strong, for Janine, for Mark, for all the unseen faces behind the frantic voices. Then came the call that changed everything. A group of survivors, barricaded in a maintenance room in the building. They were desperate, armed only with makeshift weapons and fading hope. They needed an edge, and I had access to the emergency weapons cache's location. It was against every protocol, a breach of all the rules I had sworn to uphold. But what use were rules in a world that had stopped making sense? These people needed me, and I had the power to help them survive. I made the decision then, to guide them to the cache, to give them a fighting chance. I directed them through the labyrinthine corridors via the security cameras, my heart in my throat with every turn they took. They were so close to safety, so close to the weapons that could help them hold out until help arrived, if help was even coming. As they reached the cache, I realized that I had crossed a line from which there was no return. I had chosen humanity over duty, and in doing so, I had become part of the resistance against this nightmare. It was a choice that could mean my end, but in this new world, choices were all we had left. And as the survivors armed themselves, their gratitude echoing through the phone, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could turn the tide. Maybe we could take back the night. The night was a relentless tide of panic and horror, and I, Lana, had become the solitary lifeline for the terrified voices that came through the phone. The city's heartbeat was faltering, thudding erratically with the terror of its inhabitants. I was trapped in my own command center, a lighthouse in a storm that was swallowing the world whole. The survivors from the East Wing had reached the cache, armed now but not out of danger. They were planning an escape, and they needed guidance. One wrong turn could lead them into a swarm of those things. A new call came through, a voice I recognized. It was Michael, a paramedic I'd dispatched countless times, a friend. Lana, it's bad out here. We're trying to get out, but we're pinned down in the pediatric ward. There's kids here, Lana. We need a way out. My heart clenched. The pediatric ward was a maze of corridors and rooms, a place where I had once comforted a lost child over the phone until help arrived. Now, it was a death trap. I pulled up the building schematics, my fingers tracing routes, seeking a path of salvation for them. Michael, listen to me, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. There's a maintenance corridor. It's not on the public maps. It'll lead you straight to the loading docks. But the doors are security locked, he replied, desperation seeping through his words. I swallowed hard. To unlock those doors remotely, I'd have to access the security system, a breach that would send alerts straight to the top. I'd be exposed, vulnerable to whatever disciplinary actions awaited. But the alternative was to leave them to a grim fate. I made my decision. I'm unlocking the doors. Get those kids out, Michael. The click of the doors unlocking was like the final turn of a key in my own lock. I had chosen humanity over protocol, and with that choice, I felt a part of the old world fall away, leaving me adrift in this new, merciless reality. The silence that followed was deafening. The calls had stopped. The building's power flickered, casting my office into shadows. I was alone, the weight of my choice a heavy cloak around my shoulders. As I waited for the inevitable knock on my door, the consequences of my actions looming over me, I realized that in this new world, choices were all we had left. And I had made mine. The static of the deadline was a grim serenade to the end of everything I knew. I sat in the silence of my operator's booth, the last calls echoing in my mind like ghosts. The city was a tomb, and the silence was its stone seal. I had spent the night as the voice in the darkness, a beacon of hope that was snuffed out one call at a time. The last one had been a whisper, a sobbing plea for help that cut off with a chilling finality. Now, there was nothing, no cries for help, no crackling radios, no signs of life. Just the distant, guttural moans of the undead that had claimed the city. The building's lockdown had been a temporary shield, but I knew it wouldn't hold. The security feeds flickered, a testament to the chaos that had infiltrated every corner. I had watched through digital eyes as the infection spread, as friends and strangers alike were consumed by the ravenous horde. I had made my choice to help those survivors, to be more than just a voice on the line. It was a choice that cost me the safety of protocol, the anonymity of my position. Now, it was time to face the consequences of that choice. The emergency lights cast long shadows as I stood up, my legs stiff from hours of sitting, my body heavy with a fatigue that was more than just physical. The fortified door of the operator's room stood between me and the unknown. To open it was to step into a nightmare. I thought of the survivors I had helped, of the voices that had gone silent, of the world that had crumbled in a single night. I thought of the life I had led, quiet and unassuming, and how it had been irrevocably altered. With a deep breath that tasted of dust and fear, I keyed in the code to the door. It slid open with a hiss, revealing the dimly lit corridor beyond. The sounds of the undead were closer now, a cacophony of despair. I stepped out, The line dead in my ear, the receiver left off the hook as a symbol of my departure. The building was a labyrinth, but I had the map etched into my memory. I could navigate the chaos, find my way to the surface, and maybe, just maybe, find a shred of the world left untouched. The silence was a void, but it was also a canvas. In it, I could hear the faintest whispers of hope, the possibility of survival, the chance to start anew. I moved forward, the weight of my choice a companion in the darkness. As I made my way through the desolate halls, the story of my escape began to write itself, a tale of terror and perseverance. The ending was uncertain, a page left blank, the final lines waiting to be etched by fate's unsteady hand. The city's silence was an omen, but it was also a question. In the absence of those desperate calls, in the void left by humanity's collapse, what would be my answer? Would I be a survivor, a memory, a ghost? Or perhaps, in the silence, I would find a new voice, a new line to those who remained. The story was mine to finish, and the pen was in my hand. Living in bustling New York, life was always about catching up. But when night fell and the city's tempo slowed, the world seemed to stand still for a bit. That's until my wife, Clara, began her midnight wanderings. It started harmlessly enough. Clara would get out of bed, move to the living room, and just stand there. The first time it happened, I thought she was just stressed. A little pat on the back and she'd return to bed, no memory of her nocturnal escapades the next morning. However, as days turned into weeks, her wanderings became more erratic. She'd laugh to herself, walk into walls, and on one terrifying occasion, almost stepped out of our fifth-floor window. I became obsessed with finding an explanation. Doctors diagnosed her with parasomnia, sleepwalking due to stress. But then, whispers began to circulate. Friends and colleagues spoke of their loved ones acting similarly. The city that never sleeps was now filled with tales of sleepwalkers. A college friend even laughingly referred to them as modern-day zombies. The humor didn't last. One evening, coming home after work, I found our living room smeared with blood. Clara stood in the center, her hands stained, a wild look in her eyes. The remains of our beloved dog, Rocky, lay beside her. Panicking, I restrained her, fearing she'd harm herself. Yet, her strength was monstrous. That's when I truly observed her, her pallor, the vacant stare, and a bite mark on her arm. The grim realization hit me, the sleepwalkers weren't just sick, they were turning. The streets were chaos. The so-called sleepwalkers, who initially seemed harmless, had transformed. They had an insatiable hunger for flesh. And Clara was one of them. Days blurred as I fortified our home, but my heart bled watching Clara. The woman I loved was trapped inside a monster. She'd occasionally have moments of clarity, where her gaze would soften, and she'd whisper my name. During one such lucid moment, Clara handed me a letter she'd written during her brief spells of clarity. It was a plea, begging me to find a rumored sanctuary in the city, where they were working on a cure. Tears streaming down, I promised her that I'd find a solution. Gathering supplies, I ventured into the nightmare outside. The city was unrecognizable, with sleepwalkers outnumbering the humans. Yet, amidst this pandemonium, pockets of survivors had formed. I eventually found the sanctuary, a fortified laboratory where scientists were racing against time. They were experimenting on captured sleepwalkers, seeking a cure. I returned with hope, only to find my apartment door ajar. Clara was gone. A hastily scribbled note said, "Keep me from hurting anyone else." The weight of dread sank my heart. Tracing her steps, I found her amidst a horde of sleepwalkers, dangerously close to a group of survivors. The sight that greeted me next will forever be etched in my mind. The survivors, thinking she was a threat, were about to execute her. Rushing forward, I screamed, trying to stop them, but it was too late. The bullet had found its mark, and Clara crumbled, lifeless. Devastated, I fought the approaching sleepwalkers with a newfound rage. My only solace was the hope of avenging Clara's death by finding a cure. With the help of the sanctuary, a potential cure was formulated. Distributing it across the city, we witnessed sleepwalkers return to their human forms, their murderous rage quelled. New York began its slow journey to recovery. But the scars remained. Every night, as the city drifted to sleep, memories of Clara haunted me. I'd saved the city, but lost my world. The cure had come too late for her. My heart, though beating, felt dead within. New York returned to its frantic pace, but for me, the city's vibrant pulse was a stark reminder of the heart I'd lost to the sleepwalker nightmare. The red phone beside my bed, a line I prayed would never ring, shattered the silence of the night. I was on my feet before my mind registered the shrill tone, the weight of responsibility anchoring me to the cold reality of my office. The voice on the other end was terse. "Mr. President, you're needed in the Situation Room. Now." The walk from the residence to the Situation Room was a blur, my heart pounding in my ears louder than my footsteps on the polished floors of the West Wing. The faces of the aides and military personnel I passed were grim masks of protocol, betraying nothing, yet their eyes screamed of unspeakable terror. General Abrams, as stoic as ever, stood when I entered, his hand outstretched with a folder marked with words that sent a chill down my spine, "Operation Dead Tide." The room was bristling with tension, screens flickering with images of chaos, maps pinpointing outbreaks, and the grim faces of my advisors. "Mr. President," General Abrams began, his voice steady, "at 0200 hours, an outbreak of an unknown pathogen was reported in New York City. It's not like anything we've seen before." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. "The infected exhibit violent, cannibalistic behavior. It's spreading fast. We've identified 3 courses of action, none without significant cost." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. "Give me the options," I said, bracing myself. "First, we quarantine the city. No one in or out. It's the most humane option, but we risk civil unrest, and if the infection spreads." His voice trailed off, leaving the unsaid horrors to echo in the room. "Second, we initiate a tactical strike on the most infected zones. It's a hard call, but it may prevent a nationwide epidemic." The general's hand was steady, but his eyes betrayed the burden such an order would carry. "Lastly, we evacuate the uninfected and neutralize the threat. It's the riskiest. If even one infected individual slips through, we could be looking at a national, if not global, catastrophe." The room waited for my response, a sea of expectant eyes fixed on me. I stood there, the leader of the free world, feeling anything but free. Each option was a nightmare scenario, a choice between the lesser of 3 evils. The lives of millions hung on my command, and with each breath, the weight of this impending decision seemed to crush the air from my lungs. I thought of the people in New York, of the chaos they must be facing, the fear. I thought of the nation I swore to protect, the values I vowed to uphold. And in that moment, I understood the true cost of leadership. It wasn't just about making the tough calls, it was about living with them. "Prepare a detailed assessment of each scenario," I instructed, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I want projections, impacts, and contingency plans on my desk within the hour." As the room sprang into action, I turned to the window, looking out at the peaceful night sky. Somewhere beyond the tranquility of those stars, a city was falling into madness, and here I was, tasked with the impossible. The night was no longer silent, and I wondered if it ever would be again. The maps sprawled across the table in the Situation Room were no longer just charts and figures, they were now a canvas of despair, outlining the boundaries of a modern-day plague. The option of quarantine loomed over us, a medieval solution to an unprecedented crisis. I could almost hear the gates of New York City slamming shut, the clang echoing through the empty streets. I retreated to the Oval Office, the fortress of solitude where decisions of great magnitude were made. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the cacophony of panicked voices that had filled the Situation Room. I sat behind the resolute desk, the weight of history pressing down upon me, and closed my eyes. In my mind's eye, I saw New York City as a ghost town. The once vibrant streets were now corridors of desolation. The Statue of Liberty, a beacon of hope for centuries, stood watch over a city that had become a tomb. The military, my military, was transformed into gatekeepers of a quarantined city, their faces masked, their rifles at the ready to turn away the desperate and the displaced. The reports were stark. Food supplies would last a month, at best. Medical facilities were already overrun. The uninfected were prisoners in their own homes, their cries for help echoing off the walls of their high-rise cells. I imagined the slow creep of dread as the reality set in. There would be no rescue, no cavalry coming over the hill. The quarantine was not to save them, but to save the rest of us. I pondered the morality of it all. Was it right to sacrifice the few for the many? Could I, in good conscience, condemn thousands, perhaps millions, to a slow demise? The thought clawed at me, a relentless beast that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of my being. The phone rang, jolting me from my reverie. It was the governor of New York, his voice a mixture of anger and fear. "You can't do this to us, Morgan. We're Americans, not lab rats to be left in a cage." I gripped the receiver tightly, my knuckles white. "I haven't made a decision yet, Governor. But you know as well as I do that we have to consider every option." The line went silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with resignation. "I understand, Mr. President. Just remember who we are. Remember our humanity." The call ended, and I was left with the silence once more. The quarantine was a bitter pill, one that could buy us time, but at what cost? I could save the nation, perhaps even the world, but could I save myself from the judgment of history? I stood and walked to the window, the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. The city that never sleeps was waking up to a nightmare, and I was the one who had to tell them there would be no waking up from this one. The decision was mine to make, and as the sun rose, casting long shadows across the room, I knew that no matter what I chose, the darkness would linger. The silence of the Situation Room was a stark contrast to the turmoil that raged within me. The second option laid out before me was a culling, a word that felt too clinical, too detached for the action it entailed. It was a surgical strike, they said, a necessary evil to contain the spread. But as I sat there, the leader of the free world, I couldn't help but feel the gravity of the term necessary evil. I retreated to the solitude of the Rose Garden, a place where beauty and order still reigned. It was a sanctuary amidst the chaos, a place to think, to breathe. But even here, the scent of roses couldn't mask the stench of death that this decision carried with it. I envisioned the streets of New York, not as they were now, but as they would be after the strike. The once bustling avenues would be silent, save for the cries of the wounded and the moans of the undead. The skyline, a symbol of American resilience, would stand as a witness to the horror of what we were about to do. The strike would be precise, targeting the most infected areas. It was a gamble, one that could save countless lives if it worked. But the cost, the human cost, was unimaginable. We would be taking lives to save lives, playing God in a world that had seemingly abandoned all divine law. The faces of my advisors were etched with the same conflict, their eyes hollow with the burden of what we were considering. "It's the only way to ensure the rest of the country stays safe," the Secretary of Defense argued, his voice a mix of conviction and doubt. I thought of the families that would be affected, the lives that would be extinguished without a moment's notice. Could I carry that weight? Could I live with the ghosts that would surely haunt me? As night fell, the decision weighed heavily on me. I walked the halls of the White House, each portrait of my predecessors reminding me that history would remember what happened this day. The echoes of their legacies whispered through the corridors, some in warning, others in solidarity. I stopped before the portrait of Lincoln, a president who had once faced his own kind of culling. "How did you do it?" I whispered, half expecting the stoic face to answer. But the silence that returned was a reminder that this burden was mine alone to bear. The culling was a means to an end, a brutal path to salvation. But as I looked out over the city from the windows of the Oval Office, I couldn't shake the feeling that in trying to save the soul of the nation, I might just lose my own. The dawn was breaking, a new day, a day of reckoning. The decision loomed over me like a dark cloud, and as I prepared to return to the Situation Room, I knew that the world I was about to wake up to would never be the same again. The map of New York City sprawled across the table in the Situation Room was no longer just a collection of streets and landmarks, it was a tapestry of terror, each borough a thread woven into a narrative of nightmare. The third option, the exodus, was a mass evacuation of the uninfected, a desperate bid for survival that carried with it the risk of unleashing the pandemic upon the nation. I stood by the window, watching the first light of dawn creep over the horizon, the beauty of it mocking the ugliness of the decisions before me. The exodus was a gamble with stakes higher than any poker game in the back rooms of political power. It was a bet placed on humanity's ability to outrun its own end. The logistics were a nightmare. The roads would be choked with the fleeing masses, the bridges bottlenecked. The military would have to be precise, disciplined, but even the best plans falter in the face of fear. I could almost hear the cacophony of car horns, the shouts of panic, the cries of children. And then there was the infection. It was insidious, spreading not just through bites, but through the very air of panic that would accompany the evacuation. What if the virus hitched a ride out of the city, across the state lines, into the heartland of America? The thought was a seed of dread planted deep in my mind, sprouting roots that tangled around my resolve. I turned back to the room, to the expectant faces of my advisors. They looked to me for direction, for the kind of leadership that comes from storybooks and legends, not from flesh and blood. But I was just a person, one who could feel the weight of every life in my hands. "We need to consider the possibility of the virus spreading," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. "We could be looking at a national, even a global catastrophe." The room erupted into debate, each voice a clash of reason and emotion. The military advisors argued for control and order, the health experts for caution against the spread. And through it all, I felt the tick of the clock, each second a heartbeat of a nation in peril. The exodus was a path fraught with peril, but it was also one of hope. To offer the chance of escape was to offer a lifeline, a thread to cling to in the flood. But it was also to open the door to a darkness that could spread from sea to shining sea. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the room, I knew that time was a luxury we no longer had. The decision loomed like a specter at the feast, and I knew that whatever choice I made, it would be etched into history, into the lives of every American. The exodus was a risk, but was it one worth taking? Could I, in good conscience, unleash the potential for greater horror to avoid the immediate terror? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as I looked once more upon the map, upon the city that was both a symbol of American greatness and now, a harbinger of possible doom. The hush of the Situation Room was suffocating, as if the air itself was waiting for the words to spill from my lips. The options lay before me, each a different shade of catastrophe. Quarantine. Culling. Exodus. They weren't just strategies, they were verdicts I was about to deliver upon my country. I could feel the gaze of every advisor, every military chief, every scientist upon me. Their eyes were a mosaic of expectation, fear, and the burden of knowledge. We had dissected each scenario, argued their merits and their sins, but in the end, the decision was mine alone to bear. The quarantine would leave thousands to fend for themselves, a city turned prison. The culling was a sentence of death on an unimaginable scale, delivered from the sky. The exodus was a gamble with the entire nation as the stake. I stood up, my chair scraping back with a sound that seemed to echo too loudly in the silence. The room's screens flickered with images of New York, the chaos, the fear, the undead that roamed the streets. It was a horror movie played out in real time, and I was the one who had to write the ending. "My fellow Americans," I began, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. The speech was being broadcasted live, the nation hanging on a precipice of my making. "We face a crisis unlike any before." I paused, the weight of the next words like lead in my mouth. "The measures we take today will define us tomorrow. We must be strong, we must be brave, and we must be humane." I took a deep breath, the decision cementing itself in my heart. We will not quarantine. We will not turn our backs on our fellow citizens. We will not cull. We will not play God and decide who lives and who dies. The room was still, the silence now a canvas for the decision to paint itself upon. We will evacuate. We will save as many as we can. And then, we will do what we must to ensure this virus threatens no one else. There were nods, some of relief, others of resignation. The military would have their orders, the scientists their tasks. And I, the president, would have the weight of hope and fear to carry as we moved forward. The cameras were off, the screens blank, but the images remained, burned into my mind. The decision was made, but the story was far from over. The nation would heal, or it would falter, but it would do so together. I stepped away from the podium, the future uncertain, the fate of millions now in the hands of time and humanity. The chapter of decision had closed, and the next was already being written by the indomitable spirit of a country tested by fire. The line went dead, and I was left with the silence, a companion as constant as the heartbeat of the nation I served. Day 1. It's been a tough day. I returned from my South American expedition feeling a bit under the weather. Maybe it's just exhaustion, but my body aches. It was an amazing trip, though. The hidden tribes, the wildlife, and that weird bite from an unknown creature. It stings a bit, but what's a jungle adventure without a few scars? Day 3. The bite's swollen. It's become an angry shade of red, and it hurts more than it should. I've been feverish too. Went to the doctor today, he prescribed some antibiotics and told me to rest. Day 5. I'm getting worse. The fever's relentless, and I've started hallucinating. Last night, I thought I saw shadows moving on their own. My appetite's gone haywire too. I tried steak, raw, never liked it that way, but now it tastes right. Day 7. Something's very wrong. The wounds spread, turning my veins a dark, inky shade. The hallucinations are real. I see people, but not as they are. They're food. The urge is growing stronger. I locked myself in my room, afraid of what I might do. Day 9. I attacked someone today. I don't remember much, just a blur of hunger and a rush of ecstasy. When I snapped out of it, there was blood everywhere. My neighbor, Mrs. Richards, lay lifeless at my feet. Panicking, I hit her body. Day 11. The city's in chaos. The infection spreading. People I've come in contact with over the past days are showing similar symptoms. It's like a wildfire, consuming everything. I'm the epicenter, the patient zero. The guilt is crushing. Day 13. Military's been deployed. They're rounding up the infected. I saw them execute a group today. It was brutal. They're not just killing the infected, they're burning them, ensuring no trace remains. Day 15. I'm not me anymore. The transformation's almost complete. The voice inside my head, the human part, is faint. The hunger dominates. Friends, family, strangers, it doesn't matter, all are prey. Day 17. My old friend, Mark, found me today. He's with the Resistance, a group trying to find a cure. He chained me up, hoping to find a way to reverse the infection. The glimmer of hope in his eyes broke my heart. Day 19. It's futile. There's no going back. The beast inside is in control. Mark brought a scientist today. She took samples, saying I'm the key to understanding the infection. Day 21. They tried an experimental serum on me. The pain was excruciating, like fire coursing through my veins. For a moment, clarity returned. I saw the monster I'd become, the destruction I'd brought. Day 23. The serum failed. I bit the scientist. Mark had to shoot her as she turned. The despair in his eyes was evident. I'm the source of all this pain, this death. Day 25. The military found our hideout. Gunshots, screams, and then silence. They took me away, sedated, bound, a monster in chains. I overheard them talking about a final solution. Day 27. They've put me in a chamber, a death trap. I see tanks of gas, tubes, and wires. They're going to end it, end me. Maybe it's for the best. The last human thought I cling to is a wish, that my death might be the end of this nightmare. Day 28. As the gas fills the chamber, the pain is unbearable, yet strangely liberating. I welcome it, hoping for oblivion. But deep down, the beast rages, fights, refuses to die. The world fades, but the hunger remains. The Patient Zero diaries were found amidst the ruins, a testament to the beginning of the end. The world now knows the origin, the sorrow, and the brutal reality of the outbreak. But as they say, knowing is only half the battle.